What in the world even goes into building a healthy creative ministry in your church? This week on the podcast, I am going to answer that question for you. As I have worked with a variety of churches across the country, as I have built my own creative team within the context of a church, as I have served as a designer on staff at a church, I have seen a lot of different paradigms. I've seen a lot of different models. There are current trends that I am watching happen when it comes to how do you build a healthy and effective creative ministry. And so I want to boil all of that down for you today in a way that's simple because I want to help you build a creative ministry that's healthy. Now, you may be far down the road. You may already have a creative team that's functioning and you see opportunities to get better and to grow, and that's fantastic. Lately, I've been having a lot of conversations with people who are looking to build a creative ministry from scratch within their organization, but they want to do it in a healthy way. So that's what this conversation is really designed to be. It's really meant to talk to both parties in a sense, because you need to make changes in a variety of areas in order to pursue health. But if you're building from scratch, you may not even know what all of those areas are. So this conversation should be helpful to both sides of that spectrum. I want to start by reintroducing the assessment form that I created about a year ago now. So originally when that was created, it was created with leadership in mind. So it's called the Healthy Teams Assessment. And so the goal of it here is that me as the manager or the leader of my creative team takes this assessment and I can get a sense of where we're healthy, where we're not healthy, what areas we want to grow. Over the year, it's been out. I've had some feedback from people that has really kind of spoken to a challenge for them because they're not leading a team, they are the team. And so in order to really address that, I've worked on this revision for quite a while now. I've recently gone through a pretty major language overhaul. No longer saying things like healthy creative teams. Instead, I'm talking more about healthy creative ministry. What I'm realizing is that a lot of my hangups in solving some of these problems was actually tied to my language being a little bit too exclusive. So now we actually have two versions of the assessment. So if you go to healthychurchcreatives.com, you'll be able to take the assessment from the perspective of you are the person who is in the team, you're the person who's building the team from scratch, you're a graphic designer on the team, whatever it is, but it's from your perspective now, not you having to kind of guess what leadership might think about things. So I'm hoping that that is a very helpful shift for those of you who are not leading a team, but are in fact the team. So that is the first thing I want to call attention to. Now, what you'll do when you go through this process is you will answer 24 questions and you'll get a response emailed to you. And the response will give you the information when it comes to the 4 creative cores. So if you've been following anything that I've done for any length of time, really, you'll probably be familiar with this concept. So the idea here is that there are 4 areas where I believe any creative needs to be focusing in order to be healthy and to be effective. Those 4 areas are systems, skills, imagination, and heart. Those are what we're going to jump into a little deeper today in terms of what makes up each of those areas. But when you fill out the assessment, you'll get a response that essentially grades you in each of those categories. Now, what those categories are made up of is very helpful for us to know when it comes to now taking a next step that leads us towards health. So this is kind of the whole list. So if you're building a team from scratch, this whole list is kind of the stuff that goes into making a creative ministry function. Let's start with systems. Systems is really broken up into 4 areas. Now, conveniently, we have the 4 creative cores, and each of the cores actually has 4 areas as well. So I don't know what that says other than I was able to categorize it that way. But in systems, the 4 different phases are intake, clarity, delegation, and distribution. We'll talk about each of those in a little bit more depth. The first area here is intake. What this means is how do projects become a part of your team? I have lived through many different iterations of intake. I want you to hear from the get-go, there is no right answer. I have a preference, and my preference is based on the culture in which I served. Many organizations want to have an intake form because they want to remove that hurdle of always being interrupted and reached out to for projects. I totally understand that. I empathize with that. For me, in my experience, that actually proved to be more harmful than helpful. It created more problems than it solved. So that's my bias right out of the gate, is that I have seen automation, forms, impersonal things like that not go well for an organization. So that's something that you have to consider culturally. But at the end of the day, How do you get projects to you? I've had projects submitted to me a million different ways. I've had emails, I've had phone calls, I've had people send other people, I have had people stop by my desk, I have had people stop me in the hallway when I'm doing other things. I think I have dodged getting new projects in the restroom, but I'm actually not entirely sure. I may have just blocked that out. We have had project forms. I've had a boss who delivers projects to me. I have had a ton of different ways that projects get to me. The ideal is that you have a methodology for this. It's very helpful to have a single system. And the reason it is because projects will invariably go wrong. At some point in time, there will be a mistake, and that's totally fine because we're all human and that's what happens. But you need to be able to trace where the problem went wrong. And so if you have 19 different forms of communication that are happening around every project, there's a very good chance that things will get missed. One practice I developed over time is every time anyone had a conversation with me about a project, I immediately went to my project management solution, which we'll talk about in a second, and I put all of the information there because that's where everything needed to live. If I didn't have documentation of it in that place, then my assumption is it didn't happen. That becomes very important for us to identify where things go wrong. This isn't to guilt people or to embarrass people or to say you were wrong. This is to reveal where something didn't work so that we can address it and solve it. So intake is how those projects come into you. The next step is clarity. What does it look like for you to pursue clarity? In some organizations, they'll have an administrative assistant who goes and says, this doesn't make any sense. Can you give me clarity? This isn't the date that we had scheduled. Can you give me clarity? In many organizations, the person who's receiving the project is also the one who is executing the project. And so they are all phases. And so if you're the designer and a project comes to you and you need to get clarity, what does that process look like for you? Is it a phone call? Is it an email? Is it a meeting that you schedule? Is it a desk drop where you get up at some point and swing by their office and say, hey, I'd love to ask you these questions? Whatever it looks like, having a formalized, repeatable process is very helpful when it comes to seeking clarity. Next, we have delegation. So you have a project now. How is it delegated and to whom? Now, in this idea of delegation, you start getting into project management as a part of the solution. Delegation is important because without it, you become what's called the single point of failure. And what I mean by that is if you're out sick for 2 weeks, nothing gets done. No one has access to the information. Nobody can execute. There's no one else to help you do that. Now, as somebody who served in this role, I completely understand the pressure that you feel when I say that sentence. For me, every time I took a vacation, I had to basically do as many days off as I was taking. I had to do that much extra work the week before in order to allow myself to even take that time off. So I 100% get it. The power of having what I would call hygiene in this area, being very disciplined about it. If you have all of your information in a place that is deliverable to other people, you remove an excuse that's really easy to establish in your own kind of design life or creative life. It's that it's too hard to bring other people into the project. It's only hard because you have 4 notepads with different notes and a naming convention that connects the notes somehow in your mind, or you remember on last Thursday when you talked to so-and-so and they had a change from this other person, like you remember all of those details in your mind. That doesn't help you transfer it to anybody else. So oftentimes what happens when I have conversations about volunteers or even outsourcing, it's more work to bring them in than it is to just get it done myself. I've said that many times. And I was right. It was more work. But the reason it was more work is because I wasn't focusing intentionally on this delegation part of systems. When you focus on the potential of delegation, you can build your solutions around that potential. So if you lean into a project management tool, Asana, ClickUp, Trello, all sorts of options out there. There's a lot of great options out there. Monday, that's another one. Look into a solution that will work for the way that your mind works and the way that your brain works. I've used different ones in different organizations, and they've all had different pros and cons, but it really was dependent on what made sense to the organization. So for you, make a decision on which of those makes sense, and then begin getting into the practice of putting information in those tools. Now, when you have the opportunity to delegate, you're going to be equipped to do so. The last area of systems here is distribution. So this is really the end of the line here. Sometimes when we're delivering our final product, we deliver poorly. It's not going the way that we want it to go. It's not being delivered effectively. We're missing details. Information's wrong. We have just missed stuff altogether. We didn't post things when we needed to. So there's something broken in our distribution or our output phase when it comes to systems. Now, what I often find is that it's rarely an issue of me just forgetting to schedule a social post. I have forgotten further in the process back. So maybe the intake was broken. Maybe there wasn't clarity. Maybe somebody sent me a text message. I was working on a project where I was getting emails and almost simultaneously other revisions from the same person via text message. It became very complicated for me to navigate which is the active revision. I don't know which thing I'm supposed to be listening to most. And so that would impact the final stage here, the distribution. But the problem wasn't with distribution itself. So what these 4 areas do is they help you identify where a problem is occurring so that you can then begin tracking down the root of it. That's the key here, is that you want to use these indicators, not necessarily as like, you're terrible at delivering. Well, hold on a second. Because this project missed on the delivery side, now what? Because this project failed in delegation, now what? Where did that come from? What was the issue that was born from? So those are the 4 areas and systems that you really want to focus on. Now, if you're building from scratch, that means that you're going to want to build a solution for each of these. What does intake look like for us? Do we want to be an organization that is really going to drive hard the form and that's what people need to fill out? Maybe. I know plenty of churches where that works exceptionally well, and that's fantastic. If that works for you, great. If that doesn't work for you, great. Figure out the solution though, because formalizing what intake looks like is going to be important. Same with clarity, same with delegation, same with distribution. You want to make sure that you formalize those things and build systems that are appropriate within each of those categories, because then you can effectively measure how well you're doing. So if you've taken the assessment, you got a low score on systems, those are the 4 areas to take a look. Take stock of what you currently have in your organization, or if you're building, what you're hoping to build, and start focusing on building in each of those areas or refining in each of those areas. Next, we move into skills. Skills is really made up of 4 different components: learning, developing, outsourcing, and finding in others. So learning is what happens when we just don't have the skill. There have been plenty of times throughout my career. In fact, I would say every time I did something for the first time, I was in the learn phase. I just didn't know what I was doing. I'd never done it before. Client comes to me and says, I'm thinking back to college now. A client says, I want to print a business card. This is one of the first design projects I did for a client. I want to print a business card and, whatever design you come up with. Well, I came up with the idea of using metallic inks. I thought that would be incredible. Well, then I had to start talking to printers and say, well, how do I do this? What does this even look like? I didn't know. I was entering the phase of learning. That's one of the components of skills, developing your skills. Learn something for the first time. So if you don't know something, let's say that your organization comes to you and they say, we really want to start doing videos on TikTok. Okay, well, now you need to learn. 1, how do I shoot a video? What kind of equipment do I need? What are the tactics that seem to be effective on TikTok? What is the culture on TikTok? That's all part of learning. You want to develop your skills in that area. So learning is starting from scratch. Don't know how to do it. Now let's start knowing how to do it. The next is develop. So now you've created a few TikTok videos. Excellent work. But let's take it beyond knowing how to do it. And now let's start developing the skill set. For me, I've spent a lot of time investing in video over the years, specifically more in this type of a format, like for YouTube or for social media. So I've learned a lot over time in terms of what works well for me, what's important for me to be successful. And on some levels, I still don't feel like I've mastered it, but like on some levels, I've learned what is it that resonates with people? What are the things that are helpful? So that's a part of now going beyond learning, and now you're moving into developing. After developing, we have this weird one that I put as outsource. It's a little bit of an odd one to interject here because you think to yourself, well, skills is about me attaining ability to do something. That's very true. However, your job in creative ministry isn't just to be the best executor of things. Your job is to get the job done. And so what I want to interject here for your mindset is this idea of outsourcing skills that you don't have. So a very practical example for me, I've done web work over the years. And you know what? I don't ever want to do web work. It's just not my sweet spot. I don't love it. I don't feel like I'm the best at it. I've helped clients even recently when they've needed it, but I will never, ever run an advertisement saying Lunchtime Heroes will help you with your website. That's just not something I would want to do. I know people that can develop a website for you, and I know people that that have built a platform. Think of the Church Co. It's a phenomenal resource. If you need a website, please call them instead. That's me outsourcing some form of knowledge that I don't have, that I don't want to learn, or that I don't have the capacity to learn, either because it's just not my sweet spot, or maybe I don't even have time to take on something new like that. Strategic outsourcing is a very, very effective way for you to build a healthy creative ministry. One of the big problems that happens, and I've watched this happen, and to be totally honest with you, I have led this in my own ministry. Fortunately, towards the end, we were able to course correct a little bit and not have the whole team sort of implode when I left. But I knew too much. And I say that not pridefully. I mean, I really enjoy learning how to do things. But what that did for us over time is it put too many things dependent on me. So then when I left, we didn't have people who knew how to do some of the things that I was doing. And so it took a little bit of a scramble. Honestly, it took me still being involved for a little bit, even after I left, to help navigate some of those systems that I built when truthfully, I didn't know this at the time, but I had unintentionally built a system for myself, not a system for the project to get done. And so outsourcing can actually be a fantastic way to make sure that there's healthy longevity in your team. And then the last area here is find it in others. This is really kind of wrapped into outsourcing on some levels, but hire people, bring volunteers into the conversation, or empower other people on your team. A lot of times there's this perspective that comm needs to be the group that's doing everything, or productions needs to be the group that's doing everything. I just want to challenge it a little bit. There are other people on the staff that are good at things. And so if you have somebody on your team who maybe they can make a great flyer, or maybe they can set up their event by plugging in their mic. Maybe we don't need to take on that project. That's obviously up to your discretion, but I just want to put that out there as a concept to say, when you're building out your creative ministry, when you're thinking about skills, think about it in the context of getting a group of people together for a purpose, rather than I have to be the best at all of these things so I can do all of these things. Find a good photographer. Find a web platform that saves you time and takes stuff off of your plate. Find somebody that can set up a simple event for you. Those are the kinds of things where we have an opportunity to diversify the people that are involved in the process. And when we do that, we set ourselves up to have healthy longevity in our creative ministry. The third area here is imagination. This is a tricky one because it feels like one that's constantly under threat, but it's not always visible for us. For me, there were times where I would walk into the office and just sort of lament, I don't have time to think about anything. I don't have time to process new ideas or to come up with new concepts. And so it really became a problem for me because I just felt like I was going through the motions and I couldn't really contribute in a significant way. But never once did I sit down and say, I'm having trouble with my imagination. It never came to my mind. The reality is that this is a casualty of other behaviors. The areas where it's really important to focus when it comes to imagination are rest, consumption, prayer, and inspiration. We'll start with rest. I go through this more in depth in the cohort, but there are 7 different types of rest. And so pay attention to the way that you need rest and the way that you're resting. For me, there are times where just sitting back at the end of the day and watching some sports, maybe playing some video games, just kind of unwinding, that's really helpful for me. It's actually more helpful for me than going to sleep. That's because I need a different type of rest. Now, there are other times where I need sleep. And if I'm not actually sleeping, then I will have bad consequences expressed in my life, especially in the area of imagination. Pay attention to the type of rest that you need. The next one here is consumption. Be very careful about what you're consuming. For me as a business, if I consume content of other businesses that are wildly successful and it seems like everything's going perfect, I tend to get into a bad headspace. I'm guessing the same is true for you. If you're looking at people that are doing work that you like but doesn't fit in the context of your organization, that's going to be hard for you. That was hard for me as a designer. I looked at a lot of the other churches that were out there and I felt like they were doing things from a design perspective that I wish we would do. There was a season where I believed that online ministry was a really wise next step for our organization, and our leadership did not agree with me. Well, the more I researched online ministry, the more grumpy I got, and the more it contributed to imagination problems. So what you consume is very important. If all of my ideas are born from inspiration that doesn't work in my context, it's a mess. It's just not going to work. So be careful about the things that you're consuming. This is movies. This is content that you're reading. Social media, obviously, is a big one. The music that you listen to, all those kinds of things contribute to your imagination and what you're able to create. Prayer. I think this is the most underrated tactic of all creative ministries. I just don't think that most creative ministries pray enough. I would say that most don't pray at all about the work that they're doing. They don't pray that God would help guide them as they're designing or as they're developing a plan. I just don't think that it's our go-to strategy. Usually, it's if I have time, then I'll pray about it, as opposed to before I do anything, I'll pray about it. I have found that when I am proactive about praying and bringing God into this process, asking him to guide me and to even give me inspiration when it comes to what I'm creating, I found that I produce better work. Not necessarily better in my portfolio work, but work that resonates more effectively with the group I'm trying to serve. And then finally, inspiration. Who are you going to as a source of inspiration? What pieces of content are you looking to? Where is it that you are deriving your influence as a creative? Are you looking at the largest church in America as a church of 100 and saying to yourself, I wish we could do those things? That's not a helpful source of inspiration. Think about the place that you're getting your inspiration from. I think so often we fall into the trap that we want to look at the people who are ahead of us always and have them be the thing that we're chasing and emulating. And the problem is it does a disservice to the group of people that we're serving because we aren't the same. When we are emulating, we are ignoring the group of people that we're called to serve, and we're just trying to take these things that we think look cool. So be careful about your inspiration. And so that's the final component here of imagination. And then last, let's look at heart. Heart is made up of 4 different areas that are all potentially huge. The first area here is theology. You need to be creating solutions in your creative ministry in a way that aligns with your theology. And so I'm not going to jump into the depths of that because there's a good chance that everybody who's listening has a little bit of a different bent when it comes to that. That's great. All I'm saying is have integrity with your theology. That's what I'm saying. So what we do models things about what we believe. The power of creative ministry is also a danger, and that's that we are subconsciously communicating certain things to people. And so there are plenty of times where I've designed a piece and it's about baptism, and the way that I position it matters. The way that I choose images matters because of certain elements about what we believe about baptism in terms of the church where I was serving. And that's true for you too. If you work at a church that does infant baptism, you have a different perspective than those who do believers' baptism. That they're just different perspectives. They come from theological arguments and book after book after book, and that's fine. But what I'm saying is that the way that you create solutions needs to align with your theology. The next area that goes into heart is character. Ethics. Are you ethical in the way that you do your work? Do you pursue honesty? Are you one who is, eager to take graphics that don't belong to you or take images that are copyrighted or things like that? What is it that you are valuing in the way that you do what you do? This is a component of heart, your character. How you do what you do matters. The third component of heart is perspective. One of the things I talk about all the time is this idea of mission over trade. So many of us in creative ministry come to the table caring deeply about our strategy, about our design skills, about our audio mixing, about our lighting cues. There's so many things that we care about that we sometimes forget that there's a mission that we're trying to serve with all of those skills. Don't lose sight of the fact that the mission is more important than anything. That's what we're called to serve. That's why we're in this church that we're in. So pursue the mission over your trade. And then finally, here is your attitude. Humility, patience. Those are 2 things that are really big hallmarks for me. If there's any area that can sabotage the 4 creative cores, it's heart. When you're off base in that space, in that core, it really does devastate the other areas. It doesn't matter how good you are at design or how good your skills are in general. It doesn't matter how wonderful your systems are. If heart is off, then it's going to destroy your team and it's going to breed unhealth in your organization. And so as we look at this holistic view of finding balance in the 4 creative cores, I hope that this deeper dive is helpful for you, whether you be an established ministry that's looking to make some corrective decisions, or whether you be starting from scratch and you're looking to build a ministry for the first time, a creative ministry that has never existed in your church before. I'm going to include a breakout of all of these things in the newsletter. So if you're not already subscribed, head over to lunchtimeheroes.co and sign up, and it'll be just a printable sheet so that you have a visualization of these different areas and components that make up a creative ministry. Wherever you are in the spectrum of building a team, helping a team that's not quite healthy, or protecting a team that's just doing a phenomenal job, this list of areas to focus on, this will help you make the best next step in your ministry.